Do you like Vladimir Putin? No? Well, why not? I mean, he starts wars, he kidnaps thousands of children, he kills his political opponents, but just look at how he walks. I mean, just look at this. He seems like a tough guy now, doesn't he? I think that's the logic that Trump runs with when he's back to licking Putin's boots. There are even reports that Russian officials couldn't believe how lucky they got with him. Looks like Trump ended up exceeding even their expectations. But seriously, why the hell is he doing this? The situation with Putin's Russia is so clear-cut that anyone trying to defend them is bound to run into huge contradictions and straight-up nonsense. I mean, isn't it completely obvious that all Putin wants is to destabilize the West, weaken America, and just make our lives even worse? I know I've already asked a lot of questions, but don't answer them just yet. Let's try to set aside our bias and emotions and figure out the real reason behind Donald Trump's logic. Today, I'm going to ask ChatGPT what it thinks about Trump's admiration for Putin. We'll lay out all of the real reasons behind why he treats him like this, and even break down that wild theory that Donald Trump is actually a KGB agent with a codename Krasnov. We'll get into all of that in a moment, but first, don't forget to hit that like button and double check to see if you're subscribed. And if you're not, go ahead and do that while you're watching, especially if you enjoy our conversations with AI. That way you'll never miss out on another new video that I publish each and every week. Oh, and back to that first question. If you genuinely support Putin and Russia, jump into the comments and let me know why. I mean, I honestly really want to know. I can guarantee that it's gonna get heated down there. All right, now let's get to the chat. And here we are, where first we need to gather all of the latest information to make sure that ChatGPT is fully up to speed on what's going on. And once that's done, I'll jump into the first question. Alright, it's ready. Now, ChatGPT has to be clear, straightforward, completely unbiased, no left or right-leaning takes, no sugarcoating or fluff, and it always has to give its own take on whatever I ask. So, let's start with Vladimir Putin himself to get a better idea of who we're dealing with. Now, we all know that officially Putin is considered a war criminal, but does ChatGPT think that that label is fair? And without bringing Trump into it, I'm also going to ask what it thinks about the people who actually defend him, and here's the first answer. Putin is a war criminal both by legal definition and in reality. The International Criminal Court has already issued an arrest warrant for him over the forced deportation of Ukrainian children, which is a recognized war crime. That alone puts him in the category of leaders who have been formally accused of crimes against humanity. While Russia and a few other countries don't recognize the ICC's authority, over 120 nations do, meaning he's technically at risk of arrest if he ever travels beyond his circle of allied states. But even without the ICC ruling, the case against him is overwhelming. Russian forces under his command have deliberately bombed civilian infrastructure, attacked hospitals, and executed prisoners of war. These are not battlefield accidents or strategic miscalculations, they are deliberate acts. The same pattern existed long before Ukraine. In Syria, Russian airstrikes decimated civilian areas in support of the Assad regime. Before that, in Chechnya, in Georgia, in Crimea, every conflict he's been involved in has included systemic violations of international law. Beyond war zones, his political opponents don't just lose elections. They are poisoned, imprisoned, or conveniently fall from buildings. This is not a leader who operates within legal or ethical boundaries. It's someone who uses power however he wants, knowing there's no one to hold him accountable. As for the people who could support him, it's a likely mix of those influenced by Russian state propaganda, authoritarian leaders who benefit from his alliances, and ideological extremists who admire his defiance of the West. Inside Russia, decades of tightly controlled media have convinced many that he is defending their country from external threats. Globally, dictators and autocratic regimes see him as a useful ally in resisting Western influence. Even in democratic countries, far-right nationalists praise his hardline stance on traditional values, while some anti-Western leftists blame NATO for provoking his actions. So if the question is whether he is a war criminal, the answer is yes, both in the legal sense and in the plainest moral sense. The evidence is not debatable. What's debatable is whether anyone will ever be in a position to enforce accountability. Alright, got it. And by the way, even a lot of people who don't like Putin still believe that NATO promised him something, then provoked him, and that keeping Ukraine out of NATO would have prevented the war. But that's just Russian propaganda. There should be a pop-up somewhere up top linking to a video where we cover all of that. Alright, now let's get to the real topic. How does ChatGPT see Trump's current attitude toward Putin? Let's find out. Trump's current attitude toward Putin is friendly, accommodating, and strategically aligned with Russian interests. He's making moves that benefit Russia, whether he admits it or not. He paused military aid to Ukraine, which weakens their ability to fight back. He's openly criticizing Zelensky while saying Putin is ready for peace, which conveniently fits into Putin's narrative. And now he's pushing for peace talks that seem more about pressuring Ukraine into concessions than actually holding Russia accountable. At the same time, he's talking about imposing sanctions on Russia, but that feels more like a political cover than a serious policy shift. If he really wanted to pressure Putin, he wouldn't have stopped military aid. His rhetoric about NATO also continues to raise questions. His past comments about letting Russia attack members who don't pay up still loom over US commitments. The bottom line is that Trump treats Putin with far more respect than any adversary should get, especially one actively waging a war of aggression. He refuses to call him out for war crimes, he avoids taking a strong stance against Russian aggression, and everything he's doing now makes life harder for Ukraine while making things easier for Moscow. Whether it's admiration, strategy, or both, his stance is undeniably soft on Putin. You know, sometimes it really seems like Trump just doesn't know about Putin's crimes. Like a couple of weeks ago, he was actually surprised to learn that Russia kidnapped tens of thousands of children in Ukraine. Could it be that he's just being fed fake news and Russian propaganda? Let's see what it has to say about that. It's possible, but unlikely. Trump is not some isolated figure with no access to real information. He has been briefed countless times by US intelligence agencies on Putin's crimes, election interference, war strategies, and even assassinations of political opponents. If he doesn't acknowledge these things, it's not because he doesn't know, it's because he chooses not to. That being said, Trump does surround himself with people who reinforce his worldview. He gets a lot of his news from conservative media, which often downplays or ignores Putin's war crimes. He's also been openly suspicious of US intelligence agencies since the beginning of his presidency, calling them part of the deep state. That makes it easier for him to dismiss reports about Russian war crimes as just another attempt by the establishment to control him. And let's not forget how Putin operates. He knows how to manipulate people like Trump. Flattery, strongman posturing, making himself look like the reasonable one. Trump loves leaders who don't have to answer to critics, so when Putin presents himself as a tough but fair leader, Trump eats it up. So, could Trump be completely fooled by Russian propaganda? No, he's too connected to the real world for that. But does he prefer Putin's version of events because it aligns with what he wants to believe? Absolutely. It's not ignorance, it's willful ignorance. Alright, well, sorry for that silly question. I almost forgot that the US president trusts Putin more than his own intelligence agencies. Anyway, let's move on to that whole Krasnov thing. Long story short, a former KGB agent recently claimed that Donald Trump had been recruited by the KGB under the codename Krasnov in the 1980s. Now, there's no actual real proof of it, just the word of this ex-agent. Then, what does ChatGPT think about these rumors? Could Donald Trump actually be a Soviet spy? Well, here's the answer. Yes, I've heard about the Krasnov thing. Claims that Trump was allegedly cultivated by Russian intelligence as far back as the 1980s and had a KGB codename. My take? It's a huge claim that needs hard proof, not just speculation. On one hand, it's not far-fetched to think that Soviet intelligence saw Trump as an asset. He was a flashy businessman, obsessed with power, and easily manipulated by flattery. Exactly the kind of personality intelligence agencies love to exploit. The Soviets had a long history of trying to recruit Western figures, and Trump's visits to Moscow in the late 80s would have been prime opportunities. Plus, his decades-long admiration for Putin and bizarre unwillingness to criticize Russia raise obvious questions. But on the other hand, this kind of claim needs serious, undeniable evidence. Right now, it's mostly coming from former KGB sources, and while they may be credible, intelligence world claims are always murky. It's easy to push a narrative, but without concrete documents, leaked communications, or whistleblower testimony, it's just another explosive theory. Bottom line, if this is true, it would be one of the biggest political scandals in US history. A sitting president, possibly groomed by an enemy state. But until there's undeniable proof, I don't believe it. What's undeniable, though, is that Trump's behavior has consistently benefited Russia, whether by accident or design. Okay, well, there's no proof, and that means that ChatGPT isn't gonna buy it. Got it. Now I'm gonna ask the big question and let ChatGPT break down all the real reasons behind Trump's admiration for Putin. But before we move on, make sure that you hit that like button, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. It really works best when you do it while watching, so if you want to show your support, just take a second and do it right now. Okay, thanks a lot, and let's get to the final part. Now let's ask it to break down Trump's behavior towards Putin and lay out all the real reasons behind it. In short, why? Trump treats Putin the way he does because he admires power, craves flattery, and sees Putin as the kind of leader he wishes he could be. It's not about strategy, diplomacy, or even ideology. It's about ego and self-interest. First, Trump respects authoritarian strength. He doesn't value democracy, institutions, or international alliances. He values leaders who have absolute control over their countries. Putin doesn't have to deal with Congress, a free press, or elections he could actually lose. That's exactly the kind of power Trump has openly wished for in the US. He has praised dictators like Kim Jong-un and Xi Jinping in the same way. He sees them as strongmen who don't have to answer to anyone. Second, Putin knows how to manipulate Trump. Flattery works on him like a charm. He spent years calling Trump brilliant and talented, and Trump eats it up. He believes anyone who praises him must be a friend, and anyone who criticizes him is an enemy. That's why he attacks US intelligence agencies when they report on Russian threats, but takes Putin at his word when he says Russia didn't interfere in US elections. It's not logic, it's pure narcissism. Third, Trump has business interests and personal ties that make him hesitant to cross Putin. He spent years trying to build Trump Tower Moscow, and even during his presidency, his foreign policy often seemed aligned with Russian interests. He's never released full details about his financial ties to Russian oligarchs, but there's enough smoke to suggest he doesn't want to burn that bridge. Lastly, Trump refuses to admit he's wrong about anything. If he acknowledges Putin is an enemy, that means admitting he was wrong to trust him. That means admitting US intelligence was right. That means admitting the Russian investigation, which he called a hoax, actually had some merit. And Trump never admits mistakes. Instead, he doubles down, ignores reality, and pushes whatever version of the truth makes him look good. So why does Trump treat Putin like this? Because Putin plays to his ego. Because he sees Putin's power as something to admire. Because he might have business interests at stake. And because admitting Putin is an enemy would mean admitting he was wrong all along. So, ChatGPT couldn't say it outright, but let's be real here. Donald Trump is just getting played by Putin. And when it comes to admitting that he's wrong, well, that also seems like a big part of the reason. But now, let's get ChatGPT's final take on this kind of strategy from Trump, and here it is. Trump's strategy, if you could even call it that, is reckless, short-sighted, and dangerous. Cozying up to Putin while alienating NATO and undermining Ukraine isn't some master plan. It's a mix of ego, ignorance, and self-interest. But beyond that, he's actively pushing the world closer to a major war. Weakening NATO, cutting off Ukraine's ability to fight, and signaling that the US won't stand in Russia's way isn't just bad policy. It's an open invitation for Putin to escalate. By pausing military aid to Ukraine and questioning NATO's commitment, Trump is creating exactly the kind of uncertainty that fuels war. If Russia sees an opportunity to attack a NATO country without US intervention, the entire alliance could collapse. And once that happens, it's not just Europe at risk. China, Iran, and North Korea will see an opening and start making their own aggressive moves. And if Russia actually does attack, Trump has given no clear answer on what he'd do. If he sticks to his rhetoric and abandons NATO, Putin won't stop. If he suddenly decides to respond, his impulsive nature could escalate things in the worst possible way. Either scenario is a disaster. The bottom line is this: Trump isn't preventing a war, he's making it more likely. Whether out of incompetence, admiration for authoritarian leaders, or personal grudges, his actions are putting global stability at risk. And either he doesn't understand that, or he simply doesn't care. And that's pretty much it. Let me know in the comments if these answers match your own views, or do you disagree with something? Leave a like, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and check out the description to become a member and support the channel directly. And now, click right here on this video where I pretended to be Donald Trump and asked ChatGPT to lay out the entire plan to stay in power for a third term. And honestly, the plan it came up with is absolutely insane. Thanks for watching, click on that video, and I'll see you over there in just a moment.